Joining us is a neurosurgeon. Joining us was a stud at Florida State and played for the Tennessee Titans. A man that went to Oxford while at school at Florida State. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Myron Rolle.
Yeah!
Doc!
There you go, Doc!
Attaboy, Doc!
Wow, that was awesome.
Hey, Doc, you're awesome. Before we get into you battling coronavirus right now, you're a neurosurgeon, but you've been pivoted into the front lines of the pandemic because of how big it is in Boston. First of all, thank you for your service. I appreciate the hell out of that. Before we get to all that, though, I want to go back to when you were at Florida State. How the hell were you able to be pre-med and play football at a high level? Because I was a communications major, and I'll tell you what, damn near wasn't eligible for my senior bowl game. I don't know how were you able to balance those two things? It doesn't make any sense. How did you have enough time in the day? You are such an outlier in this world. How did you make it work?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it. For me, I think it was finding, a space where I could really perform in the classroom and on the field. So really creating that space and like advocating for myself. When I went on my recruiting visits as a high school student, I would tell Bob Stoops at Oklahoma and Bobby Bowden at Florida State and at the time Lloyd Carr at Michigan, like, hey, I want to go pre-med. I want to be a Rhodes Scholar. I want to make sure that I can get these things done while I'm here with you. I can't sign with you unless you give me that commitment. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. So they carved out space for me to go to labs and for me to do these things because they know I took it seriously. And it was important for me to not only perform well on the field, but also to get my degree and do well. And then in the summer times, I did not go home. I got on my boogie. I did 18, 20 credit hours. I was really going advanced and trying to take the harder classes like organic chemistry and biochemistry in the summer when it's a little bit slower, slow it down when I got to the fall so I could focus on football and then pick it back up again in the spring. And all those things seem to work out together.
You're making these decisions as an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old. I was getting out $40,000 in loans just to party. I didn't even know what a Rhodes Scholar was going. Like, I to be honest, until you won it, I don't think I even knew it existed. I was like, a guy playing football just won the Rhodes Scholar? Damn, that must be good, I assume, because I never heard it before. Like in high school, I assume you were just like at the top of the charts for everything and you kind of saw what the opportunity was with that incredible brain of yours. And then you just so happen to be this incredibly gifted athlete as well. And who helped you with these decisions and process and maybe shaping your future? Because that seems like an incredibly mature thing to talk about as an 18-year-old.
Yeah, certainly. My family, for sure. My parents, my brothers, we're from the Bahamas, and my parents put a lot of these role models in front of me, like Ben Carson, got me interested in neurosurgery. He's a neurosurgeon from Hopkins, now Secretary of HUD in D.C. Nelson Mandela and Kofi Annan and Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois. They wanted me to see these black figures who look like me, came from similar backgrounds, so I can sort of pursue my academic achievements with vigor and veracity while still playing the sport that I was passionate about. And I went to high school in Princeton, New Jersey, so I'd walk over to the university and read about a guy named Bill Bradley who won a Rhodes Scholarship, New York Nick and Senator. And I was like, oh man, if I can do what he did as a true student athlete, then maybe I can, achieve some other goals and help inspire some people. So he kind of put the idea of Rhodes Scholar in my head, and I put that to the metal when I got to Florida State, and thankfully it worked out my junior year.
What the hell is the Rhodes Scholar? I know it's a big deal. I know it's a very big deal, and if our recollection is correct, I believe you were on a plane for something happened where you were on a plane right before a game because you had to take a test at Oxford. What is the Rhodes Scholar, and how do you apply? What is it?
Yeah. So the Rhodes Scholarship is probably the highest academic award you can earn as an undergraduate student. It's awarded to about 32 people every year out of hundreds of thousands of applicants. It's very, very tough. It typically does not go to a jock. Bill Bradley was probably the last major one to win it. Pat Hayden, quarterback at USC, he won one as well. And then you have people like Bill Clinton and Susan Rice and Rachel Maddow, General Wesley Clark. You have some really extraordinary people who have won it in the past. So you go to Oxford University for either a year or to 3 years where they pay for any sort of educational endeavor that you want to pursue. I got a master's in medical anthropology because I wanted to look at the social and cultural aspects of medicine, find that gray area of medicine, find out why people take their traditions and customs and gender roles and post-colonial stigmatizations, how they include that with their healthcare treatment and their treatment process, healing process. So I can be a neurosurgeon one day who also understands the people that I'm treating. And so Oxford was great. And then I took my interview at Birmingham, Alabama, the same day we were playing the University of Maryland. So I took the interview, did well, won the scholarship, got on a private plane up to College Park, Maryland, got to the game around the second quarter. We won the game 37-3, and I won the scholarship that day. It was a big day for Florida State, my family. It was really cool.
I'd say. Now, did you do that in Tallahassee, or did you have to go to Oxford, which is in England, right?
Yeah. So the interview was in Birmingham, Alabama, because I applied in the district, the Southeast District, and then once I won the scholarship, then you fly over to England, to Oxford, and that was after I was done at Florida State.
What was it like over there at Oxford? Obviously, the way it's talked about here in America is this fairy tale world where all the smartest humans on earth go, you won't go to Oxford. I mean, it's like one of these things that it's talked about. How many Americans were there? And I would assume that it's just like a pretty legendary place to be at, with the amount of brains that are around you that are equal to. Is it the first time you'd ever been like around your peers that you felt like were equal to you whenever it became to the academic world?
Oh, absolutely. That's actually a great point, because I transitioned from this bubble of Florida State University where my teammates were listening to Plies and Rick Ross and Trick Daddy and, just really getting after it, right? Dreadlocks, gold teeth, saying words like jit and eating country fried steak. And now to transitioning to Oxford University, where my classmates are talking about the United Nations and Gaddafi and, how are we going to do world economics and keep the global resources alive? I mean, all these crazy, really high level cerebral intellectual conversations. So it was interesting. It's very old. You realize how young America is when you go there. Yeah. But it was a place where I've developed friendships that have lasted a lifetime. I have friends in Zambia now, Cairo, Egypt, Perth, Australia, all over the world because of my time at Oxford, and it's a time and an experience in my life that I think has inspired other young people, especially if they come from the Bahamas where I'm from, or from anywhere, and say, look, if I want to achieve academic success, here's a guy, Myron Rolle, who did it, and maybe I can do the same. So that made it worth it for sure.
Being a role model is obviously not only a lot of pressure, but a big challenge, and I think you're a great one. Do you feel as if you're in the middle of one of those conversations you were having in those Oxford classes right now?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. This is it. This is exactly how it was.
All right, let's pivot to now. Obviously, we're in the middle of some of the craziest times in our world's history. The Spanish flu in 1917 or whatever back in the day. I don't think there's anything that's comparable to what we have going on right now. You're a neurosurgeon, but they've pivoted you into being on the front lines of the coronavirus right now because Boston has so many people affected by it. What is something about this coronavirus you think that is maybe, and I don't know how much you've heard about the outside world because you've probably been working a lot, but what do you think is a misconception about this coronavirus? There's a lot of talk about, it's just a flu at the beginning. Then obviously everything has changed. Like, no, it's not a flu. This is a very different animal. It's an airborne virus and things like that. What do you think is a misconception maybe about the coronavirus? And what is day to day like for you up there while you're treating patients up there?
Well, I think your first question, one of the misconceptions is that, it's very infectious and it can hit anybody. And I know we've been hearing a lot of times that it's a certain subset of the population that get hit the hardest. And that potentially is correct, but this coronavirus has a propensity for angiotensin converting enzyme spaces, which is just a fancy way of saying in the lungs, right? There's alveoli in the lungs. It gets there, it sits there, it incubates for a couple of days, and then fifth, sixth, seventh day, boom, you quickly decompensate potentially. Your oxygen saturation goes down. You start breathing fast. You start trying to figure out how you can get oxygen into your body. They may have to flip you prone so you can expand your lungs better. You have a cytokine release system where like your whole autonomic system kind of gets out of array and disarray. So a lot of things happen quickly, and I think the misconception is that A, this is not that serious, and B, that it doesn't have devastating effects quickly on people, where you have to make these end-of-life discussions and these goals of care discussions between family members who aren't even allowed to be at the bedside because the visitor policy at most hospitals, especially ours and Mass General, won't allow people to come in because we're afraid that they may bring in more infections. So that is something that's real. I hope people put a human face on this issue and realize that it's not just fantastical. It's not just something that's disconnected. We are all a part of this together. We're all a part of this global and national team, if we're speaking about just the United States, and that it has a serious and dire consequences for sure.
Okay, so what is the difference between this particular strain of virus that it can, from what, I mean, it depends on what day it is, the information you hear. You hear that it can live on a hard surface for a certain amount of time. Then you hear it can live on a cardboard, where other viruses, as soon as they hit air or a certain temperature, they kind of dissipate. With this one, they're saying that it can live on and continue. What does that mean? And is that accurate?
So yes, we have heard stories that this virus has an envelope, really like a protective covering that allows it to live on these surfaces, door handles, anything that you basically touch, and that's why it's so important for hand hygiene. We were mentioning that early on, and I think people have sort of taken to that. If you can see the amount of consumption of hand sanitizer around the nation, maybe it's just a little bit of hysteria trying to be prepared, but it's something that's real. Lifestyle behavior modification, hygiene is incredibly important. We do it all the time when we go in and out of the room, wash our hands, make sure we're gowned up, and make sure we're not touching anything that has been touched by a patient who's either a COVID-19 rule out or positive. They're on contact precautions, they're on droplet precautions, they're on airborne precautions, they're in special rooms because we know this is very, very difficult. And even as neurosurgeons, there's some crossover with this virus with us in head and neck surgery. If we go into the nose or we go into any of the sinuses to evacuate some sort of tumor, there's aerosolized particles that could get up in the air and infect us. We use high-speed drills a lot of times and electrocautery. These things that sort of burn through tissue that can aerosolize the body fluids and get into us as well. So there's issues everywhere. This is very serious. I wish I could take the people who are reading this or hearing about this on social media and take them into our hospital and see that, yeah, it's not a game, it's not a joke. We still have a long way to go, and it takes some time, and we're doing the best we can on the front lines for sure.
We'll talk about the curve in a little bit, because out here in Indiana, the sun's getting a little bit brighter. The weather's nice. It feels like people aren't quarantining as much as they were maybe in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I think Indiana is a place that was really taking the precautions seriously. The roads were emptied. There was a lot going on. Then the weather changed, and it feels like people went from being stir crazy to feeling freedom to feeling invincibility. Are we at the point where the people who have it are contained enough, where the quarantining isn't as necessary as it has been in the past? Or do we still think there are potential asymptomatic carriers and people walking around who have it who can continue to maybe bump this curve right back up to where it was headed before?
I'd say the latter. I don't think we're out of the woods. I think we have some more time to go for sure. And asymptomatic carriers, you feel good. You feel like you have that cloak of invincibility, like you said. You want to get back to normal life because this is what you do. This is who you are. And this has really disrupted all facets and aspects of human life. It's not something that I have to really explain because we all are living it. But at the same time, epidemiologists, scientists, PhDs, they have to have the time. They have to have the time to find a vaccine, a cure, some sort of therapy that's going to be safe and efficacious to be able to be available for public consumption on a wide level. And I don't think we're just there yet. So it's going to be some more time. We need to be a little bit more patient with this whole thing.
Hydrochloroquine in a Z-Pack has been something that's been talked about both on social media and on whether you turn on anywhere on YouTube, on the news. Everything has been talked about how in cases that it's been used, and this number might be wrong, it's a number that I saw on the internet, so it could be wrong, 90% recovery rate whenever hydrochloroquine or Z-Pack are mixed together. Is there a reason, is that accurate, that number, in your knowledge? And also, is there a reason why you can't just give a stamp of approval on a cure because it hasn't been trialed and tested? And in these uncharted waters, if somebody gives like, hey, this is the answer and it doesn't work, then obviously there's a chance for a little bit more hysteria. What do you feel about the hydrochloroquine and the Z-Pack combination? And is that potentially going to be our answer in the long haul, and they just don't know if that's the case yet?
It potentially could be. It potentially, and I use that word again 3 times, potentially. I think you need to have a drug or some sort of therapy that is not going to harm the patient worse than what the virus they're trying to protect it from will do. And also is going to do what it's intended to do, not going to have deleterious side effects that will truly hamper and impede the health of the person who is once taking it just for prophylactic cases. But there have been doctors and scientists working for not only hydrochloroquine and the azithromycin combination, but also angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors potentially as a way to affect change. Some antiretrovirals as well. So there's some IL immunoglobulins as well. Some other important scientific modalities and methodologies to try to figure this thing out. So there's several different experimental drugs going on at this point, and we're trying to expedite the process. But I think the most important part is that we just need to remain patient and not become subject to the time of haste, that we just need to get back to our normal life and watch sports again, or go back and play on the street again, or go and join these large crowds in our favorite gatherings before we truly have an answer. As medical professionals, we are at baseline very conservative, and so we want to make sure that things are incredibly safe before we distribute it to our population, because at that point, if we do and it ends up being harmful, that just adds the census to the hospital, overrides it once again, and this idea of maybe getting people out of the hospital because you're treating them with this drug actually backfires on you, because they're actually coming back in and re-stressing your healthcare system, which can be very difficult.
Okay, so here in Indianapolis, Eskenazi Hospital downtown, they had the ability to change their entire hospital to an IC. Every room could be an ICU room for this coronavirus victims. Now, the big talk out of Europe and Italy was that the medical system couldn't withhold the amount of patients that were coming in. The infrastructure was basically not enough for the amount of people. I heard that story in New York. They were building tents in Central Park. They had other things happening. You look outside of hospitals, they have tents in the parking lot where people are coming in, getting tested, and then maybe filtered in. In Boston, where you're at, is it at capacity? Or does your hospital continue to be at capacity? Or have you seen a little bit of a waiver in the amount of people coming into the hospital with the COVID-19?
I would say the latter. It's kind of going a little bit maybe plateaued, but I think it's going to spike. And for our hospital, we've been proactive in trying to maybe even get our pediatric patients out of the hospital and into our children's hospital, because as we know, the children's can be carriers and they can be anitis, but they aren't typically the worst affected by this. And so if we get them out of our hospital and to another hospital across the street, that opens up the pediatric wards and pediatric ICU to be ICUs for adult patients who come in with COVID-19. So these are some of the ways we're trying to do this. Our PACU, our post-op anesthesia recovery areas that we do after surgery, those areas are now be turning into ICUs, and we're trying to consolidate the the PACU spaces for our post-op patients. So just being creative with our bed space, being creative with our personnel, making sure that only essential staff members are in the hospital so that you're just not reinfecting people who are here with us every day. All of that is important. I think in the next week, we're really going to be challenged, and our administrators and leaders just need to continue to make the decisions that keep us ahead of this issue rather than playing catch up, and that's important.
Chris Cuomo, Paisan, who works for CNN, I guess he had a nasty bout with COVID-19. He talked about having hallucinations. He said he was obviously puking, and massive temperature and shivers and everything like that. Have you seen it? And by the way, that was the first time I had heard the extent of how bad this virus really is for people. At your hospital, is there levels to this thing, or is there like hey, this is like an average COVID-19 patient? Oh, damn, this is the hallucination, shivers, puking, COVID-19 potential pass away. Like, is there levels to it, or is everybody that gets it basically in a terrible spot? I mean, everybody.
Yeah, no, there's certainly levels to it. You're absolutely right. And it starts off not as severe as one may think. You're like, okay, you tested positive with a nasopharyngeal swab. You tested positive again. So it's a true positive. We actually believe that test to be real. And then you're managed, and you're taken care of, and you're in critical care, and you're having acute, Q1 hour, maybe Q 30-minute checks from nurses and the staff. And then by day 5, 6, or 7, boom, then you have the cytokine release. Then you have respiratory distress. Then you have compromise in that respect. Then you start decompensating quickly if it gets very severe, and if you are somebody who's potentially with pre-existing and pre-morbid conditions that put you even more at risk. I think what's positive about the Chris Cuomo situation and others who have the platform to speak about this issue, it gives us anecdotal, real-life information on what's actually happening. It takes us in the world of COVID-19. And again, I think that just adds a human face and a real story behind this, so that people say, you know what, this isn't just some far out-reaching, stretched out figure. This isn't just some hysteria or scare that people are trying to get over on us. No, this is a real thing that people who we somewhat know through media, at least, or through our communications, they're going through it, and it could happen to me too.
Anytime you put a face to a cause, it obviously hits home a lot more. I think a lot of people did that with Chris Cuomo. You mentioned there that you do one test and then you do a second test. Has there been a lot of false positives you found on the first test? And what is the difference between the first test and the second test? And have the tests changed? Because I think I saw a graph where the first test was like they shove it in your nose, it touches your brain, and then it comes out. And a lot of people were scared to get tested almost. You're doing that twice. Is that because there was false positives, or why would that happen?
So it doesn't touch your brain, thankfully,
God, yeah.
or else there'll be a lot more calls for neurosurgeons to help, for sure. But yeah, so a lot of times the double tests are done based on high risk factors. Someone being very old, having a lot of premorbid conditions, you want to make sure for certain that they have COVID-19, that you're not treating somebody who's got a false positive with all the resources available when this person may not actually have it. And it's true. It's not 100% sensitive, 100% specific test. There are hardly any tests that are like that. So it's really on the discretion of infectious disease, our wonderful medical teams, our biothreats team here at Mass General, when they say, okay, let's look at this patient's profile. Let's see if they are at high risk. They're likely to have COVID-19. If it's negative, let's test them again to make sure they're really negative. Or if it's positive, let's make sure they really are, because our resources need to be allocated correctly. Our energies and focus need to be allocated. And if we're going to put it all in on this person, let's make sure they have it. So that's important.
Do we have a lot more tests than we originally had? Like, are we at the point where we have enough tests? For instance, when the MLB is thinking about building a biodome type situation out in Phoenix, where all the players are going to go out there, they're going to be quarantined in apartments, they're going to play in the 10 stadiums around Phoenix and go back to their apartments, no fans, no family, no nothing. But they thought they could potentially look bad if they're eating up tests to make sure everybody's clean when the rest of the world might not have enough tests. Is that something that the MLB should be worried about, or people should be worried about? Is there not enough tests? I think here in Indianapolis, only essential professions that were in the medical field were allowed to get tested. Are we at the point where we have enough tests to find out if people got it or not? So if people do have it, we can put them away, or are we still trying to figure out ways to create those?
So I think we certainly could get more tests. I think we have a decent amount right now, but I think it's important not to just not to test everyone just based on a whim. It has to really be done based on symptoms, exposure, your history, looking at the whole overall patient profile. If you're a person who has been in contact, or at least 6 feet within contact within someone who's got a positive test or been exposed, I think it's reasonable that you get that test. And I think there are places that you can, whether it be through the Department of Health in your local communities or through major hospitals like ours, talking to your primary care physicians to sort of make sure that we manage through these waters. I think that's important, not to sort of overuse the resources that we have. While we do that, while we sort of triage these patients ourselves, I think more tests are going to be continuously being developed, especially in hotbed areas. Like Philadelphia is coming up on a hotbed situation. We certainly are. Other cities around the country, especially places where people are on top of each other and re-exposing themselves. These are things that are important. So it takes a holistic approach to this. And while we do that, by looking at the whole patient in its entirety, or in their entirety, then we can kind of ramp up our test availability and accessibility to everyone.
How come 6 feet was the chosen distance? Is that son of a bitch only got a 6 foot vertical, or like what? Why is 6 feet the number?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not exactly sure. That's a question better answered by an epidemiologist, or Dr. Fauci, who's on TV a lot.
We'll call
really good work. Hit him up.
When you were, maybe taking an interception back to the house and jamming the Rick Ross implies in that Florida State locker room, did you have a feeling that one day you'd be on the front lines in one of America's most storied cities, Boston, battling against a worldwide pandemic?
I never thought that, for sure. Neurosurgery is so subspecialized. People come in with brain tumors or aneurysms or degenerative disc disease, and like, okay, this is what I'm going to fight. This is what I'm going to treat. This is what I love to do. And this has really repurposed and redeployed me and my colleagues to something totally different. But it's a part of, I think, my makeup to just want to help a very, marginalized and underserved population. I'm from the Bahamas originally, as I might have alluded to, and we had Hurricane Dorian hit our country a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And I left Boston, I left Harvard, not because I'm an emergency response clinician, not because I know how to test cholera in water or how to avoid, stepping on rusty nails to get tetanus or something like that, but because I have some healthcare skills that could aid my home country. And so when I see things that are ways that I could give back and I can serve in any capacity, I want to do it. And a lot of my colleagues have taken on that same ideology.
You're awesome, man. I can't thank you enough. I feel like at some point in our conversation, you thought to yourself, this does feel like one of them fucking conversations at Oxford.
Exactly, man, for sure. All we needed was like some, some tea and some crimpets, or maybe some bangers and mash, or fish and chips, or something like that.
Hey, we got bangers for you. We got Rick Ross and Plies on deck.
There we go.
Hey, doctor, I'll have to have you come back on. I thank you so much. You made me feel so much smarter. I feel like a lot of people probably learned some things there.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it for having me. Definitely.
You ever seen a movie Phenomenon with John Travolta?
I have not. No.
It involves neuroscience. I didn't. He has a brain tumor that makes him like this superhuman, basically. And I just wanted to know how I could get one of those.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I'd probably stay away from getting brain tumors.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rhodes Scholar, Dr. Myron Rolle. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Hey, cheers, Doc. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate it, boss. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we blew through the radio break again. Mm-hmm. There's no way I could cut that off. And to be honest, nobody's listening to their damn radio at dawn. I apologize for that. But I feel like, by the way, I feel like I had a little bit of pressure there to get some information out of the guy.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like I learned a lot. That was a cool convo. What an incredibly smart man, by the way.
At least 50 words in there I had no idea what meant.
I paused him a couple times and he said, nose. Thank you. Thank you. Lung congestion. Okay, thank you, sir.
It's nice to get a reset every once in a while. You might think you're pretty smart, and then you hear someone like that talk. It's like, I'm actually pretty fucking dumb.